This was the year I tried an iPhone as my daily driver for the first time. And you know, it wasn't bad. After having felt for a while like it was time to switch back to Android, I saw a deal for the Samsung Galaxy S7 that I just couldn't pass up. With the S8 out now, the S7 is undeniably last year's flagship, but that doesn't automatically make it a bad phone. So can it still hold its own? While the Galaxy S7 does come in a larger Edge variant, I opted for the smaller, flat S7 model. It does come with a smaller battery, 3000 mAh to the S7 Edge's 3500 mAh, but after years of phablets, lately I'm really liking phones that are smaller and easier to use one-handed, and the S7 at 5.1 inches is a pretty decent size for that, although my hands aren't tiny either. Time for a physical tour. The phone has really solid build quality and generally just feels great in the hand. I had a case on it for a while, but eventually I took it off and I haven't looked back. On the right side of the phone, we have a single lock-unlock button that has a pretty decent click to it, and on the left we have two separated volume buttons that are identical to each other and to the lock button. On the top, there's a microphone and SIM/micro SD card tray, and on the bottom, we have a 3.5mm headphone jack, a disappointingly micro USB charging and data port, another microphone, and an unfortunately placed but still pretty decent down-firing speaker. You may have noticed I called the USB port disappointing. Even a year ago, I think USB-C should have been used here. It's certainly forgivable though, because it at least means I have a decent number of cables laying around that already fit it, but still, USB-C. The back is glass, which feels quite nice with the phone's main 12-megapixel f1.7 camera and flash, which we'll talk more about later. On the front, we have the 1440 by 2560 resolution display, which at 5.1 inches gives you a whopping 577 pixels per inch, which I would normally, in most cases, comfortably call unnecessarily high, especially since the phone comes set to 1080p rendering out of the box for the sake of battery life, or at least it has since the Nougat update. That's right, the phone comes with a 1440p screen that is only rendering at 1080p and then upscaling them out of the box. You can change this, but doesn't that kind of seem silly? Kind of goes to show it's a bit unnecessary, but that's not exactly true, because this phone is geared towards VR with the Samsung Gear VR, and when you're using that, 1440p would actually be quite helpful to avoid the screen door effect. It's just the rest of the time that it's like, I don't know. One other note on the screen, it generally looks great. Samsung really knows their stuff. However, I noticed pretty much as soon as I turned the phone on that there's a blue color shift when you tilt it slightly away from you. At first I thought it was the screen protector that came on out of the box, but after taking it off, it still happened. It's not a huge deal, and I only really notice it on white parts of the screen, but it definitely is there, and it can be one of those things that you just can't unsee once it's been pointed out to you. Above the screen, we've got an RGB notification LED, giving you a solid way to get notifications. If you're trying to stretch the battery life and want to turn off the great always-on display feature of the phone, that's another way to get notifications. Then there's the earpiece and the forward-facing 5-megapixel f1.7 camera, which again, I'll talk more about later. Below the screen sits capacitive back and app switcher buttons that Samsung has used for years, still in the opposite order of most Android phones, flanking a physical home button that features a lightning-fast fingerprint reader. The home button doesn't work quite like on iPhones, where if you use the home button instead of the dedicated lock button, it unlocks the phone immediately, but instead, it'll just take you to the lock screen, and if you leave your finger on it long enough, it'll eventually unlock it too. I'd prefer it to work the iPhone way, because it's nice to have essentially a dedicated lock button and a dedicated unlock button. That's actually really useful if you just want to go to the lock screen or you do want to unlock, but I can live with it. And I don't think it's the fault of the scanner. It does seem to be by design, because the scanner seriously is fast, maybe even faster than the iPhones. If you go to the lock screen using the lock button and then tap the scanner, it's a split second to read your fingerprint. It's really impressive, actually. Now, personally, I'm not a huge fan of mixing a physical button with capacitive buttons, as I often hit the home button kind of forgetting it's going to be a physical button, and it's kind of a weird feeling when you hit it expecting the feeling of a capacitive button and it's actually a physical click. It's not a huge deal though, and really I'm just happy that the fingerprint reader is on the front of the phone in my preferred position. Also, a lot of people love that it's a physical button, so your mileage may vary, it's a preference thing. It's also nice that the navigation buttons don't take up any of your screen real estate, so that's something to consider. Now let's talk specs. As with most Samsung phones, this has a couple variants in processor. The US variant has a quad-core Qualcomm Snapdragon 820 processor with Adreno 530 graphics chip, and the worldwide variant has Samsung's own octa-core Exynos 8890 processor with Mali T880 MP12 graphics chip. The two processors should be similar in speed, although I think the Exynos variant does have a slight edge in most applications, while I've also heard the Snapdragon is better for most graphics and games. In general, most people seem to prefer the Exynos, but they're fairly close. The Snapdragon model isn't going to be painfully slow or anything. The phone packs 4 GB of RAM and 32 or 64 GB of internal storage, along with optional micro SD card expansion, Corning Gorilla Glass 4 on both the display and the glass back of the phone, and a 3000 mAh non-removable battery which can be charged either through the USB port or through wireless charging. The phone performs really well. It's definitely no slouch, and I think most people would be pleased with it. I really feel that realistically we're at a point where last year's processors are still really fast, and I don't think most people would be disappointed by the performance on this device at all. I will say that it definitely heats up more than the iPhone 7 during games and intensive tasks, but it hasn't ever gotten crazy hot or anything. TouchWiz has gotten significantly better over the years. I used to be someone who hated it with a passion, and while I still definitely prefer stock Android, I don't really have too much to complain about with Android 7.0 on the S7. It definitely still introduces some lag and stuttering though that you won't see on more stock phones, and that's too bad. But basically, if you're coming from something running stock Android, you'll probably find it a little bit more sluggish and stuttery for a little while, but it's also something you get used to pretty quickly to where you don't notice it anymore. Battery life on the phone has been really solid. It's less consistent than what I got when I was on iOS with the iPhone 7, but it's still really good and it always gets me through a day, sometimes even with around 5 hours of screen on time if I'm not playing any games. So that's really good, especially for a phone of this form factor and size. Now for the cameras. The cameras on the Galaxy S7, particularly the rear 12 megapixel HDR capable camera, are one of the best things about this phone. Seriously, the cameras rock. Not only does it have really fast autofocus, which is actually super nice, but it's also really clear in well-lit situations, and the low-light performance is frankly excellent. This phone raised the bar for low light in that I seriously notice the difference when I'm using anything lesser. This takes usable photos, often when I don't expect it to at all, and I really like having this around with me in my pocket. If video is your thing, the rear camera features UHD 3840 by 2160, QHD 2560 by 1440, Full HD 1920 by 1080 at 60 or 30 frames per second, and a few lower options like 720p and the really cool 720p slow-mo at 240 frames per second. The maximum photo resolution is 4032 by 3024 with a 4 by 3 aspect ratio, or you can go for a 16 by 9 aspect ratio with 4032 by 2268, but all that's really doing is cropping down the picture to that aspect ratio. So I recommend leaving it at 4 by 3, and if you ever really want 16 by 9, you can crop it yourself. 4 by 3 is also an aspect ratio that's quite friendly to viewing photos in portrait mode on your phone, like if you plan to share them on Facebook or Instagram. The front-facing 5 megapixel camera is a really solid performer in its class too. It supports HDR as well and automatically detects and focuses on faces. You can expect solid, clear pictures in well-lit situations and also some pretty solid work in low light, especially if you make sure to leave HDR enabled. It also features video recording at QHD 2560 by 1440, Full HD 1920 by 1080, and a few lower options as well. It also has a default 4:3 aspect ratio for photos, with 2592 by 1944 as the maximum resolution, or you can go down to 16:9 aspect ratio with 2592 by 1458 resolution. One thing I really like about this camera is that it's fairly wide angle, so if you want to take a picture with other people, it can be really great for that. It's a pretty solid selfie cam. One final note on the camera is that it launches really quickly. I recommend going into the settings on the camera app and making sure the quick launch option is enabled, which lets you open the camera just by double tapping the home button even when the phone is locked. This gets you into the camera really quickly and can help you grab shots that can be easily missed if the phone isn't fast enough. One final note is call quality. This is still a phone after all. What you're hearing right now is a recording of a phone call on the Galaxy S7. And right now I'm speaking through the S7. And what you're hearing right now is the other end of the phone call coming from a Nexus 6 still recorded on the S7. So what do I think of the Galaxy S7 overall? I think it's a really solid device. And as far as its age, it's not really showing unless you hold it right up to this year's devices. In fact, you should hopefully be seeing some really great deals on this phone. I got it for around half off its original price, and if you find something like that, or even something not quite that good, I definitely recommend this phone. What do you guys have to say about it? Let me know your thoughts, the things you agree with, the things you don't, down below. Want to buy an S7 or basically anything else? Check out my Amazon affiliate links in the video description to help me out. I personally recommend signing up for Prime or Student Prime if you're eligible. And if you liked this video, please hit that like button, which actually helps me out a ton. If you loved the video, subscribe and ring that bell to get a notification when I post. I've got an LG G6 review coming up soon that you really won't want to miss. Make sure to check out this video if you're looking for something to watch next. Check me out on Facebook, Twitter, and Twitch, and Instagram at the links in the description. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.